Rachel is 39. She has spent the last 6 years leading a product team at a software company, and in those 6 years, every formal performance review has used the word exceptional. Her team members describe her as the most attentive manager they have worked with. She anticipates problems before they become visible to anyone else. She remembers birthdays, personal crises, and the particular sensitivities of each person she manages with a precision colleagues find both remarkable and occasionally unnerving. In every meeting she convenes, she monitors the room, the expression of the person who has gone quiet, the body language of the one who disagrees but will not say so. With continuous attention, most people reserve for the content being discussed. She cannot finish a meeting without knowing whether everyone in it is satisfied, not whether the objectives were met. She needs to know whether everyone left the room feeling good, feeling that Rachel has been enough. She has not slept well in 3 years. The wakefulness is not dramatic. No nightmares, no racing thoughts. It is more like a low-level vigilance that does not fully suspend, as if some monitoring system, running continuously through the day, cannot remember how to stop when the screen goes dark. Her therapist has suggested she work on setting better limits, a phrase Rachel has found completely actionable in the abstract and completely ineffective in practice. She knows where the limits should be. She can describe them with precision. Something consistently prevents her from installing them. That something is not a deficit of knowledge or willpower. It is a structure, a very old structure, built long before Rachel had any capacity to participate in its construction, and still running the meeting room with the same autonomous efficiency that Rachel brings to managing everything else in her professional life. This is educational content exploring Jungian psychology. It is not a substitute for professional mental health support. If you are struggling, please seek qualified help. The case presented is entirely fictional, constructed to illustrate a psychological concept. Jung introduced the concept of the complex, an emotionally charged cluster of associated ideas, images, and affects organized around a core psychological theme, early in his career, and it was through the study of complexes that he first established his clinical reputation. The mother complex is not primarily about the mother. More precisely, it is not primarily about the actual, historical woman who raised the individual. It is about what the psyche has done with that relationship over decades of development. The internal structure that the earliest experience of being cared for, evaluated, or failed by has installed at a level of the personality that lies beneath ordinary conscious access. In Volume 9 of the Collected Works, Jung described the mother complex as the activation of the archetype of the great mother in the personal psyche, shaped and colored by the primal human experience of absolute dependency. CW Volume 9I, Section 154. Every individual begins life in a condition of complete dependency on a caretaking figure. That figure becomes the template against which the developing psyche learns what it means to be witnessed, to be seen as adequate, to be enough. When that template involves conditional approval, when attention is contingent on performance, on being appropriately helpful, on not requiring too much, a specific and durable pattern is installed. The child internalizes the evaluating presence. The external figure becomes an internal figure, a voice, a felt sense of being watched and assessed, a monitoring apparatus that continues the work of evaluation long after the original relationship has ended. The crucial clinical insight, the one popular psychology consistently underestimates, is that this internalized presence is not accessible to rational intervention. Rachel knows, at the level of fully articulate conscious thought, that her colleague's satisfaction is not her existential responsibility. And then the meeting begins, and the knowing changes nothing. The monitoring begins. The checking begins. This is the defining characteristic of a complex. It does not respond to knowledge. It operates at a level of the psyche beneath the level at which knowledge and rational understanding operate. In Jung's formulation, a complex is an autonomous piece of the psyche with its own logic, its own emotional charge, its own activation triggers. When activated, it does not wait for permission from the conscious mind. It simply begins to run. To understand why the mother complex produces the specific pattern Rachel exhibits, the high achievement, the relentless attentiveness, the inability to let a room contain dissatisfaction, it helps to understand the two dominant forms the complex takes in clinical presentation. Jung described the positive mother complex and the negative mother complex, and the terminology is somewhat misleading because neither is, in clinical terms, entirely benign. The negative mother complex produces a person who cannot trust nurturance, who expects abandonment, keeps relationships at a controlled distance, is chronically defended against being cared for. The form Rachel carries is the positive mother complex, and its positivity is, in a specific sense, the source of its particular difficulty. The positive mother complex involves an identification with the nurturing function itself. The complex is organized around a profound need to be experienced as the good mother, the one under whose care no one suffers. This produces, reliably, a particular kind of high achiever, someone whose work is genuinely excellent, whose relational attunement is remarkable, and whose internal experience is one of continuous effort against an evaluating presence that is never finally satisfied. Because the internal mother, the introject judge, is not a reasonable interlocutor. It does not reach a point of declared sufficiency and stand down. It simply raises the standard. James Hollis, in the Eden Project, articulates something essential about this dynamic. The need for external approval in people carrying this complex is not really about the approval of the other person. It is an attempt to satisfy the internal figure, to finally receive, through the responses of the outer world, the unconditional validation that the internal mother continues to withhold. Every satisfied colleague is momentarily evidence that Rachel has been enough. But because the evidence is external and the judge is internal, the relief never fully converts. By the next morning, the account is back to zero. This is why the suggestion to set better limits functions as advice, but not as change. Limits are a behavioral prescription. The mother complex is not a behavioral problem. It is a structural one, a piece of the unconscious organized around a very old relational template that produces its effects regardless of what Rachel consciously decides. Changing the behavior without addressing the structure is like adjusting the thermostat without attending to the system generating the cold. One of the consistent features of the mother complex in its people-pleasing form is the progressive erasure of the individual's own wants. Rachel has become very good at reading rooms. What she has not developed, or what the complex has suppressed, is an equivalent attunement to herself. What does Rachel need from a meeting? These questions do not function as primary questions in her psychology. They are secondary at best. Hollis describes this as one of the central wounds of early relational life. The child who could not afford to have needs because having needs created problems in the relationship. The adult version of that child runs excellent meetings and does not sleep. Metabolizing the complex cannot happen through insight alone. What analytical work tends to involve is a sustained, gradual encounter with the internal figure, not to defeat it, but to differentiate from it, to develop the ego's capacity to recognize when the complex is speaking and to make a choice about whether to comply, rather than complying automatically and calling it personality. Return to Rachel. She is 39, she is exceptional, and she has not slept well in 3 years. The sleeplessness is the most honest thing her psychology is currently producing. The body's report on the cost of running a vigilance system continuously, the monitoring that never fully suspends after the meeting ends. The useful question from a Jungian perspective is not, what can Rachel do to manage her anxiety about others' approval? That question already accepts the frame the complex has installed. The more fundamental question is, whose voice is it that delivers the verdict on whether Rachel was enough? Because it is not her colleagues' voices. Her colleagues' performance reviews have said exceptional for 6 years. The verdict those reviews produce lasts, by Rachel's own account, approximately a day before the account resets. Rachel grew up in a household where approval was not withheld cruelly. Her parents were not unkind, but approval was conditional in the specific way that conditions high achievement. It arrived reliably when Rachel performed well, when she made things easier for the adults in her life. It was withdrawn, not harshly, but noticeably, when Rachel required more attention than was convenient, when her own needs created inconvenience. The child's learning from this, not a conscious learning, but a somatic, relational one, was that safety lives in the other person's satisfaction. that the right kind of performance produces the condition of being enough. Rachel no longer needs her parents' approval. She is 39 and professionally independent. But the internal structure installed by that early relational learning is not interested in this development. It continues to process every significant relational encounter through the same template. Is the other person satisfied? Did I do enough? The workplace has simply become the most recent arena in which the old question is being asked. What would it look like for this to shift? It would look like Rachel developing the capacity to notice, in the moment when the checking impulse arises, that she is about to consult the internal judge rather than her own assessment. It would look like small experiments in tolerating the ambiguity of not knowing whether everyone left satisfied. It would look, initially, nothing like progress, because the complex's response to being resisted is typically an intensification of anxiety before any relief arrives. This is the part that the set better limits advice reliably omits. The path through the complex does not feel better immediately. It feels worse first, the complex insisting that disaster is imminent, that approval has been withdrawn, that something essential is at risk. Sitting with that anxiety, repeatedly, over time, without immediately acting to relieve it. That is what metabolizing a complex actually involves. One might ask, as a genuine question from a position of curiosity rather than judgment, whether one's own approval-seeking has ever been examined not for its content, but for its source. Whether the voice that delivers the verdict of enough or not quite enough actually belongs to anyone present in the current moment, or whether it is considerably older than any current relationship, whether it predates the career, the marriage, the current professional context entirely. One might also ask whether the attentiveness one brings to the emotional states of others is matched by any equivalent attentiveness to one's own interior. Not as a moral prescription, as if caring for others were a flaw. As a diagnostic observation. The person who cannot feel their own needs, because the complex has colonized the space from which needs would normally arise, cannot actually meet the other person in any complete sense. They can manage the other person. But meeting requires two presences, and one of them has been made systematically unavailable. The professional environments that reward the behaviors the mother complex produces most reliably are precisely the ones where people with this complex flourish. Management, client services, healthcare, education, care-adjacent knowledge work. The complex does not produce disadvantage in these environments. It produces advancement and the title exceptional in 6 consecutive performance reviews. This is what makes the mother complex one of the more difficult psychological structures to bring into awareness. The symptom is indistinguishable from professional success. There is no external signal that anything is wrong. There is only the sleeplessness, and the monitoring that does not suspend, and the account that resets to 0 every morning regardless of yesterday's evidence. The complex is not Rachel's fault. It is her inheritance. The question the second half of life eventually makes unavoidable is whether she will continue to administer that inheritance automatically, calling it character, or whether she will develop the kind of differentiated relationship with it that allows her to also become the agent of something genuinely her own. Rachel's sleeplessness is a more honest account of her psychological situation than any performance review. It is the report from the part of her that has been running the monitoring system continuously for 39 years without anyone ever asking whether it is tired or whether it would choose to stop if stopping were understood as an option. The mother complex does not announce its presence through symptoms that are legible as distress. It expresses itself as character, as professional excellence, as attentiveness, as the vigilance that never fully suspends. What it is actually expressing, beneath all of that, is the oldest question in Rachel's psychology. Was that enough? Did I do enough? Is the other person satisfied? The answer, from the internal figure, is what it has always been: provisional, conditional, subject to review at the next occasion. The attentiveness Rachel brings to others is real. The care is real. What the complex has done is conscript those genuine capacities entirely into the service of managing external approval, leaving nothing available for the internal direction they might otherwise take. The question is not how to eliminate the attentiveness. It is whether the attentiveness can learn to include Rachel herself as one of the people worth attending to. This is educational content exploring Jungian psychology. It is not a substitute for professional mental health support. The Shadow Work PDF, 5 Questions to Begin, is available through the link in the description. Subscribe if this kind of examination is one you want to continue.